Welcome, everyone, to Beyond Connectathons, how scalable fire testing is possible with FHIRplace. This WEDI Virtual Spotlight is sponsored by Drummond. It's my pleasure to introduce WEDI's Executive Director, Robert Tennant.
Thank you, Michael, and let me add my welcome. This is a very important spotlight. As we all know, we're getting very close to the compliance date, and so I think the discussion today is really going to help jumpstart many organizations as they move towards compliance. So for those that aren't overly familiar with WEDI, I just want to take a few minutes to let you know a little about our organization. Back in the first Bush administration, the Secretary of HHS was Dr. Lewis Sullivan, a practicing physician, and he knew firsthand some of the challenges that providers and health plans face in exchanging health data. So he convened what he called the Working Group for Electronic Data Interchange, made up of some of the leading experts in the nation at the time, and they drafted two reports, which were ultimately folded into what we know as the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. WEDI was named in HIPAA as an advisor to HHS, and we've performed that role ever since. We have a close working relationship with the key HHS agencies, including CMS, ASTP, and OCR, the Office for Civil Rights. Our mission is complex yet simple. Our goal is to provide multi-stakeholder leadership and guidance to our industry. We have everything from the largest health plans in the nation to providers, to standards groups, to clearinghouses, patient advocacy groups, vendors, all with the goal of developing a healthcare ecosystem that meets the needs of all the stakeholders, including patients, and drives efficiency and cost savings in the industry. As I suggest, we have really two roles in the industry. One is convener, and you're part of that today, where we bring industry experts to talk about key issues in health IT. We issue guidance, and we do a lot of our work through our work groups, and I'll talk about those in a few minutes. But as an official advisor to HHS, we take that role very seriously. We draft letters and official comments based on requests for information or proposed rules. And we do that through the use of what we call our member position advisory process, or MPA. And that's a chance for the WEDI membership to come together to discuss, for example, a proposed rule and come up with a consensus-based set of recommendations that we can provide to HHS. Next slide. As you all know, the CMS 0057F regulation first finalized in 24, now with a compliance date of 1/1/27. WEDI has done multiple events over the last few years and will continue to offer education on this. We started off with more of a what is the government asking for, and now we're getting into some very specific issues facing the industry, like today, where we'll focus our attention on the issue of testing. Next slide. As I mentioned, a lot of the work that WEDI does is conducted through our work groups, sub-work groups, and task groups. We have a work group devoted to prior authorization. We've got one on the No Surprises Act, and our most recent one is the Patient Experience Work Group, where we're discussing some of the requirements of the 0057 final rule in the area of communication between health plans and their members. So if you're interested in getting involved in that, please reach out to our expert on work groups, Ariana Poole, and you can get all the information you need on our website as well. So today's agenda, once we finish our welcome, we'll move into the market study that Drummond just concluded. We'll also hear from Drummond in terms of their experience with working with organizations testing these APIs. And then we'll have a panel of experts discussing testing considerations and updates and interoperability. And I can say I'm absolutely delighted to partner with Drummond. I've worked with them over the years. Phenomenal group, and they have really a wealth of information to share with all of you. So I'm very excited to have them as a partner with WEDI. Next slide. As always, we try to make these events as interactive as possible. This is really a unique opportunity for you to interact with some of the experts in the field. So take advantage of that. Use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. Ask questions, raise issues. We'll have the Drummond experts monitoring the chat, and we'll be able to answer your questions. And as always, slides from today and the recording will be emailed out to you after the event, so you're able to share with your colleagues. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Lisa Palmer, who is Vice President of Health IT, and Tim Bennett, who is Director of Strategic Healthcare Initiatives. Lisa and Tim, the stage is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. All right, I will transition to sharing my screen here. All right. All right, thanks everyone. Thanks for joining us today and for having us. Let me start by introducing myself and Timothy Bennett. Timothy is our Director of Strategic Healthcare Initiatives, who focuses on the intersection of healthcare policy and technical implementation of our FHIR programs. And I'm Lisa Palmer. I'm the VP of Research and Development, and I lead Drummond's work in interoperability and product strategy. Now, today, we want to cover a couple things with you. First, Drummond recently conducted a study on FHIR interoperability testing practices across health IT organizations. We think the findings are worth paying attention to, and I'm going to share some of the key highlights from this market report before we dive into the rest of our topics. Then Tim is going to discuss FHIRplace, which is Drummond's solution for real-world testing, and discuss how it offers a pathway to support true interoperability. And then we will switch over into our panel for the day. All right, so our first stat here in the study was discussing barriers, and nearly 68% of respondents identified partner readiness as their single biggest interoperability risk. So not really a technical gap, but an ecosystem gap. And over 70% rated real-world testing with external partners as very or critically important. So organizations kind of know what they need. The challenge, of course, is actually getting access to it. We asked about Connectathons, and as you could see from the title of our presentation today, we think Connectathons are great, but that they're really a first step. So when we asked participants, how frequently they use different testing approaches, there was a pretty clear pattern that internal and self-testing is, of course, nearly universal. Almost everyone is going to do that. But when it comes to external validation, Connectathons, third-party audits, that's where the usage would drop off pretty significantly. We have an interesting quote here that someone submitted when they did our survey, and this we think captures something really important, that Connectathons do serve a real purpose, they're a valuable starting point for validating how a FHIR implementation guide can be implemented and how structured data exchanges between systems. But as this respondent put it in their quote, they don't emulate real-world environments where you have multiple systems and disparate network environments actually sharing data. And that's where we see this meaningful gap between we tested at a Connectathon and we're ready for production. When looking further at the barriers to testing, we asked participants to identify their top barriers, and 2 of those really rose to the top here. And you'll see that each was cited by roughly half of the respondents. The one was time constraints, and the other was access to testing partners. And these aren't really surprising because they align with the very things that the organizations need most: partners to test with and the time to be able to do it. And as shown earlier, we know that these 2 things actually can be some of the hardest things to come by: time and testing organizations to exchange with. All right, now we did have a little poll here that we were going to launch where we wanted to kind of hear from you the biggest challenges with FHIR interoperability testing. So if you are willing to share about your experience, we'd love to hear what yours has been with challenges in the Zoom poll. Let's see. Michael, do we have that poll? If not, that's okay.
If you want to kind of talk about it a little bit, I'll get one up for you.
Okay, that's fine. And you know what I'll do while you're doing that, I'll just show the next slide here, which is about how you can access the full market study. Because I wanted to have this up on the screen for a moment so that if people want the QR code, they can grab it. So if you would like to see the full market study, these were just a few of the highlights. Here's a QR code to get access to the report, and we'll send you the full PDF of it. Has some interesting data, some further stats about the industry and how folks responded from the payer and provider side and the developer side. All of those are in this report. All right, now it's okay, Michael, too, if we want to do the poll a little bit later at the end. We'd just love to hear from the group, but it doesn't have to be at this moment. So if we want to try,
I'll have it made up and then I'll let you know via chat.
Yeah, that'd be great. We can do that kind of at the end. And we'll transition to Tim to give us a little bit of overview about FHIRplace, and then we can come back to hearing about what the challenges are from the audience. Now, with that, I'll shift to Tim and how Drummond is kind of helping to address some of the issues that we identified in the market study. Tim is going to kind of walk us through FHIRplace, what it is, how it works, and how it offers one solution to FHIR testing. So Tim, I want to let you take over this next slide and explain to us, what is FHIRplace? How does it work? How does it address some of what we've already talked about today?
Yeah, so, building off those, some of those barriers, to testing that you talked about before, Lisa, one of those is, and a significant one, is just accessibility to test partners, and to be able to test in a way that reflects how you're going to deploy your technology, in the real world, and have confidence that you'll be able to, actually utilize that technology to, handle scalable transactions. So to that end, FHIRplace it's a virtual place for developers of FHIR technology and their end users. So that includes providers, payers, and intermediaries, to be able to test FHIR business use cases in a real world and in a scalable way. FHIRplace is characterized by this automated full matrix approach to FHIR interoperability testing using a structured methodology within a Drummond managed environment. And we'll talk about what full matrix testing approach means in a few minutes, but FHIRplace sort of enables the stakeholders in this FHIR ecosystem to move beyond those connectathons and beyond just using conformance test tools or their own testing, and the limitations that comes with either just doing a pilot testing with one or two of your business partners, or participating in a connectathon. This enables these technology developers and their end users to be able to find and discover interoperability issues as they're tested in a sort of a real world approach, and resolve those found interoperability issues between many test partners before, presumably before you find them after you deploy this in the real world, and it becomes a much more cost intensive and end user disruptive manner to fix and resolve them. So that's essentially what FHIRplace is a place where we can gather all of the players in the ecosystem to be able to test these complex FHIR use cases at scale and in a real world fashion.
Yeah, that's great, Tim. Now, you mentioned FHIRplace being full matrix testing, with full matrix testing, being real systems on the provider side, the payer side, even intermediaries, all testing with each other at scale to confirm that interoperability in a simulated real world environment. I'm going to go to the next slide and have you tell us a little bit more, about how this works. How this works and how this solves kind of some of these problems.
Yeah, so one of the responses here to partner readiness is if you are a technology developer, or if you're a provider or a payer, or even an intermediary, going and finding your own test partners, that's really, at least in Drummond's view, that's really not your primary business, right? Your primary business is, I'm developing the technology, or I'm implementing this technology so that as a payer or as a provider, I can use the technology to improve, patient outcomes or patient experience. Your primary business is not to go find many test partners to test to make sure it works. But everyone knows that I've got to try to go do that, because that's the only way to do it. So what we try to do here with FHIRplace is, Drummond sort of steps into the role to convene or to facilitate bringing together many different technology developers or their end users into one place where sort of members of FHIRplace, participants in FHIRplace, at their fingertips have many testing partners at their disposal. They don't have to go and find them. They basically can just show up, and here's some other people that you can test with. Kind of makes it easy to find, test partners. And so, that's one of them. I think one of the main, values of joining FHIRplace. But the way that we test is also important too. You could show up and test like this, but if you're not testing at scale, if you're not taking an approach to testing in a manner in which it's going to be deployed in the real world, well, then it's going to have limited value. And so these two things together, being able to have test partners at your fingertips, where you don't have to go spend a lot of effort and time to find them, but then also have a structured environment that facilitates testing at scale, testing the way it's going to be deployed in the real world, brings together, those two main ideas of value.
Yeah. And, this kind of highlights in the problems over here all those different areas from our market study: partner readiness, that 50% can't access testing partners, that Connectathons, are good, but don't adequately prepare them. And then what you've covered is sort of on this other side, saying Drummond's taking care of that matching for you. We're bringing the testing partners and hosting the test events. We're allowing continuous testing throughout your development cycle using real systems and real organizations in a realistic environment. So trying to, generate a solution to this problem that we're hearing in the marketplace, to say, you don't have the time, you don't have access maybe to all these people that you want to test with. Let us help you bring that to the table, because we really believe in the value of testing to get us to a place where this works, in production, in the real world, for something with such high stakes.
Yeah, and let me just expound a little bit on the continuous testing aspect of it, and this sort of kind of plays into the sort of the notion of life cycle testing around these structured events and being able to match up partners. But the whole life cycle testing, I think, is a really important aspect of FHIRplace. We're not convening FHIRplace just because we need to get everyone ready for a January 1st, 2027 regulatory deadline. We view that as really just the start of a long multi-year process of deploying FHIR technology to solve complex health data exchange, business use cases. And folks are starting at different places. Some folks have been developing prior authorization technology for a few years now. Some are just now starting to get onto the bandwagon. Some are finally buying their products and beginning to implement and integrate it into their back end and their business systems. Some are on older versions of FHIR, some are going to be on new versions of FHIR, but that's a reflection of really the real world, and the fact that even beyond initially getting ready for a regulatory deadline, these products are going to continue to be used in the real world, and they're going to have changes in versions to the specifications. The products are going to undergo, their own rev life cycles, adding new FHIR capabilities or other capabilities. And there will be this ongoing need to continue to test these complex systems together, even beyond a regulatory deadline. And so FHIRplace is a long-term commitment to the health IT ecosystem of let's establish a place where we can test this FHIR technology. EPA is, maybe the first step, but then there'll be patient cost transparency. There'll be oncology prior authorization, which is its own complex animal that will eventually need to be tested at scale, and other business use cases that we haven't yet dreamed up yet. So FHIRplace is a place where we can establish a way from now on for the next 20 years, 25 years, where we can test complex FHIR technology in the way that it's going to be deployed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this next slide here gives a bit of a visual picture of how the systems would connect into this testing environment.
Right.
And how Drummond might facilitate the matching and the types of players that organizations could actually see as part of that testing experience. So do you want to give us a little more details on how this would work?
Yeah, so full matrix testing from Drummond's standpoint actually sort of was something we invented in the late 90s, early 2000s, when Drummond sort of cut its teeth as a early enabler of moving on to using the internet to exchange secure business documents. And so we were there at the advent of the initial digital signature standards and encryption and HTTP and HTTPS, and how businesses were thinking, how do we use these standards to use the internet to exchange data privately and securely? And so Drummond was there helping write those initial implementation guides with the IETF, and then performing, bringing together implementers of those standards that were selling their products in the marketplace to enable B2B and businesses to do this, and bringing together these interoperability test events. And in these interoperability test events, we coined this phrase as full matrix testing. So where you have many different products and they all test with each other, so that you have a matrix of test participants and products, and everyone tests with everyone else. And so in order to do that, then you confirm that everyone is interoperable with everyone else, and that there's not just these silos of interoperability between one or two or a few partners. The whole ecosystem becomes interoperable. And so over the years, as Drummond got involved in the health IT testing and certification, and then with the advent of these complex fire use cases, we were able to recognize, let's go and bring this proven methodology that we've done in other domains for the last 20, 25 years and bring this into the fire ecosystem. And so as you see here, our methodology here, again, convening providers and payers and their technology vendors, and along with the intermediaries that they will be using in the real world for providers and payers to find each other through clearinghouses, through QHINs, through HIEs, through trusted networks, and test the systems that way. And so, with our test data, our test plans, our test cases, and our test scenarios, enabling the marketplace to be able to test like this is what we mean by full matrix testing.
Right. Now we'll do one final visual here to show a little bit of the behind the scenes on the FHIRplace architectural design here. So at a high level, I know this is a lot to take in. So Tim, just at a high level, kind of walk us through what the FHIRplace architecture looks like to pull it all together.
So one of our sort of tenets at Drummond is the way that we have kind of traditionally tested, outside of perhaps of a Connectathon or a pilot, but typically the way certification testing happens is we use test tools, or we use reference implementations to test an implementation to see if they're conformant. What we want to do with FHIRplace, what we are doing, because by the way, we have already started our CRD test, Lisa. We should probably mention that. We've started. We're ongoing with that. So this architecture here you see is the architecture that we're using right now to test with. The idea here is that we don't want tools to get in the way of the data exchanges that are happening between providers and payers. Their EHRs, their smart on fire apps, and the payers systems, and their policies that that they're going to be testing against. We want that to go through intermediaries. We want the traffic to happen back and forth between that without a tool being in the way. That way, we can approximate as best we can the way that it's going to be deployed in the system. But then Drummond has a connector with the intermediaries so that we can get access to the transactions that go between the providers and the payers. And in that way, we use that captured data through the intermediary to manage the testing process, to be able to update the test matrices, understand which test cases have been exchanged between partners, be able to analyze those requests and responses. It goes back and forth to see if they have the expected data, to see if there's interoperability issues, if there's conformance issues, if there's data quality issues, that sort of thing. And then be able to report that out. And then even as part of automating the process, we're able to, send signals to the test participants and their products to automate the testing, so that we can eventually take this hands-off approach of testing and then be able to really ramp up the scale of the testing that we do. So in a nutshell, that's kind of a sort of a high-level picture of how we're approaching managing and facilitating the testing process, while at the same time allowing the products that are actually doing the work to do it unimpeded.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great summary. So for the organizations, like you said, we have folks that are already testing with us. We're working right now on the CRD scenarios. When we talk to them about why they engage with FHIRplace, it's really come down to three things. First being risk reduction and catching interoperability issues before production deployment, not after, customers find them. Second, time savings, not needing to independently coordinate testing partners, that we would handle that matching. And then third, confidence of being able to demonstrate to customers that, and internally to the organization, that you validated the system with real partners before go live, which we feel is a meaningful differentiator with use cases where the stakes are so high for something like prior authorization. Just to show you here what the process looks like for those that join FHIRplace, it starts with joining the FHIRplace network with our community, sharing your interest, and sort of giving us a capability profile. What are you able to do today and time? Not everyone is ready yet with all of the different use cases, and that's okay. Our goal is to have people jump in where they're at and begin testing where they're at. And as they continue to develop and do further use cases, they can test those as they become ready. So we get that capability profile to understand what you're capable of today and time, and then match you with other organizations that are also able to do those test scenarios. Then we would do testing with intermediaries, payer systems, EHRs, the provider side, all of those different roles depending on who you are in this ecosystem. And then we would get detailed results back for you. So you'd be able to see any issues that came up, and we would work with the organizations to resolve those. So we go through, identify the issues, help identify which side they're coming from, walk through the resolution of those, and then retest to make sure it works once the resolutions have been deployed. And then at the end, we have recognition where folks want to be Drummond certified and get a seal. This is different from, say, O&C testing and certification or something like that. This is a Drummond seal saying, we've gone through this interoperability testing, this real world interoperability testing, and shown that we can interoperate with these different parties. Okay, now with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen. All right, and we can, at this point, let me take a look and see. And let's see if we have any questions to cover. Michael, I think you have that poll ready for us. If we wanted to wrap up with folks just sharing any of their barriers that they've run into, and then we can dive into the panel side.
Will do. Just a quick reminder for those who are considered co-hosts, please do not participate in the poll. This is for the rest of the folks. If you do participate, you'll end up closing the poll. So just want to launch it real quick. And it is launched on screen.
Okay, great.
keep it up for 10 more seconds and then we'll share.
Okay.
All right, ending poll, showing results. So Lisa, can you see those?
All right, yes, I can. All right, so we had quite an interesting split here. Time being 35%, you know, that aligned with something in our market study as well. People saying time was a challenging one. And then a split next at 23% of access to testing partners and lack of structured environment. Again, things that came up in our market study as well. And then a little bit also on cost, and some saying current frequency meets needs. So it's interesting because I like to hear from as many folks as we can, but these do seem to be some very common denominators. You know, I noticed a comment as we were doing the poll from Wendy that was put in the comments saying, I didn't see robust test data as a challenge, but I think that is a noteworthy issue. And I think so also. So I wanted to just call that out. That wasn't one of the options, but I do think that was an interesting comment, and maybe something we'll get into a little bit more when we talk about, when we get on the panel to talk about test data. So very good note. All right, I think we're good with that. Michael, thank you for doing the poll. And with that, we'll transition back over to you to go into our panel. I'm excited to hear from all the participants.
Excellent. And it's my pleasure to introduce the moderator for this panel. He is the executive director with the Massachusetts Health Data Consortium, and he is the current WEDI chair-elect, Denny Brennan.
Thank you, Michael. And thank you, Lisa and Timothy, for an excellent presentation. It's my pleasure and privilege to moderate a panel of experts in testing and individuals and organizations who will definitely be deep into testing. In addition to Timothy Bennett, who you've had the opportunity to meet, we're joined by Tom Loomis, Vineeth Atur, Cody Eberson, and myself as moderator. And before we proceed, I would like to ask if Timothy and Tom, you could take, Timothy, Tom, and the other members of our panel, if you would take a moment to introduce yourself. Let's start, Tom, with you.
Sure, yeah. I'm Tom Loomis. I work in enterprise architecture at Evernorth Health Services, and I support our interoperability program.
Vineeth?
Yep. I hope I'm audible. This is Vineeth Atur. I lead the product management for Cognizant TriZetto integrations and have closely been engaged in driving the build out of the solutions on our TriZetto Unify strategy, one of which is TriZetto Payer electronic prior authorization solution.
Very good. And lastly, but certainly not least, Tim, reintroduce yourself to our audience.
Yeah, so at Drummond, I'm the Director of Strategic Healthcare Initiatives. Basically, these days I've been, architecting the FHIRplace testing platform. But another thing that I do is I am the co-chair of a fairly new work group at HL7 under the FAST Accelerator for the Testing at Scale work group, which I co-chair with Matt Blackman from Sequoia, where we are talking about how do we test fire at scale, in a comprehensive, industry-wide approach to that. So, I kind of wanted to add that as well to, and also to plug that work group. So if you're interested in testing at scale and get something out of our panel discussion, there's a place where you can kind of continue to come and participate in those discussions at the FAST Testing Scale Work Group at HL7.
Excellent, thank you. We're also joined by Cody Eberson. Cody, can you introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. My name is Cody Eberson. I'm the co-founder and CTO at MedPlum. We're an open source healthcare developer platform. We help a lot of different organizations, particularly digital health, to build custom EHRs and a lot of healthcare interoperability.
Excellent. Thank you all for joining us. Excuse me, I have a little bit of a remnant from a cold or a bug of months ago that seems to be persisting. So thank you for your forbearance with that. Let me start by asking a question of our colleagues from Drummond, and Tim, of you. We got a good insight into FHIRplace and to how the testing process works, how matrix testing solves the problem of multiple parties trying to test with other multiple parties. But when we look at the journey that organizations are on when it comes to testing, where are your clients on this testing journey today, and how many are actively testing versus preparing to test?
Yeah. So, Drummond's, we've been doing certification testing in the EHR world, since the Meaningful Use program started in 2010, right? So a lot of our existing customers is from the EHR world. Now, we have been, working with the payer community now for the last, few years as, after the CMS 9115 rule came out, and we began to, offer testing programs to the payer community. But I would say in a general world, and I think this was reflective of WEDI's own market surveys, is that we're really just getting started. Adopting these FHIR technologies. There have been early adopters that have been working on the IGs and being part of the work groups for a few years now, and those folks have implementations that are testable. But I would say by and large, most of a lot of the EHRs and even some of the payer systems are really just now getting on board with either starting to work on their FHIR technology or getting to a point where they're ready to test. So and I think that's generally speaking, some of the concerns is that just the state of the implementations are still very young.
Thank you. Other panelists, comments? I see Cody, you nodding your head in agreement. What are your perspectives on this?
Yeah, I think that's right. It's still early days. I think that there are people who are they're believers in the FHIR APIs. They're believers in doing the proper API integrations, and they're pushing hard on it. And there's plenty of people who view some of these APIs as a nuisance and a cost center, and there's a bit of friction there. But I think the vision of where this all can end up as a destination is still a positive and encouraging one. But we just got to keep pushing forward because, there's resistance, but a positive ending.
Thank you. One of the other questions we have is, there's conformance testing and then there's real world testing. And I put this question, Timothy, to you first, but please, other panelists, lend your perspective. But what's the biggest difference you're seeing between passing a conformance test and making workflows actually work in production? Starting with you, Tim.
Well, so I think some of the challenges here with technology like FHIR-based prior authorization is that there's a couple of things at play. One, you do have to implement the FHIR technology, which specifies how you package the data up, in computable formats, and how that data is transported over the wire. But the other parts of the workflow, because these are business use cases, is that there are business rules that are executed at the endpoints, either on the payer side or the provider side. And the results of these, business rules being executed have everything to do with what is, populated in the requests and responses of the FHIR technology. And so traditional tools that we have is really good at helping you understand if you've implemented the standards so that you're properly formatting the request and response, and that you're able to implement the security protocols and things like that. But what traditional tools aren't very good at is making sure that there's what I call sort of the semantic interoperability when a provider is going to ask a payer if an MRI for a particular patient is needed, if it needs prior authorization or not. When you package that request up and you send it to a payer and you do the exact same thing for a very similar patient, similar practice, and you go to a different health plan and then a different health plan and then a different health plan, are all of those requests handled and responded in a way that that makes sense? So we encode all of this data in terminology languages that gets translated, and different business rules, and there's just a lot of moving parts to it. And I would say that's the trick. Some of the tricks in moving from this is all happening today in a back office with human beings who have learned that this payer wants it coded this way, and this payer wants the same thing coded in a different way. That's a lot of sort of what I call lore and legend that sort of exists in the back office. And how do we then, in an effort to reduce cost and improve the process and make it faster, quicker, better for the patient, how do we get that sort of lore? How do we codify that lore and that legend stuff that exists in the brains of humans and on sticky notes attached to cork boards and things like that? And how do we make sure that this makes it into the electronic world? And I think the way that we do that is we have to do a bunch of testing. We have to find where those areas fall apart, and then fix them for the new world, for the electronic world.
Great. And Vineet, I saw you nodding there for a couple of times. What are your comments with regard to this?
From an intermediary standpoint, from our perspective, it's primarily we offer this multi-provider, multi-payer experience where we are able to, connect up to different EMR technologies and also have that, smart orchestration enabled to multiple payers. We've been working, at least as part of the participation in the few Connectathons over the last few months. We've been actively testing with some of the participants out there. And the observation has been that even though we are able to provide a test kit out in the format of API payloads, which are in conformance with the Da Vinci specifications, when an actual trigger happens from some of those technology platforms, it does not line up, right? There are differences. There are, conformance issues or, data readiness or availability issues as it pertains to the request that truly comes out when a real test is performed. And then there's always this dialogue as to, is this then become something that has to be adjusted within the technology platform? Is that something which intermediary has to manage within their platform in connections with the payer systems. And this is a space where, as an intermediary, we do not just do a FHIR facade or a FHIR relay, but rather we also have certain transformation rules specific, processing to ensure that we are able to generate some meaningful utilization management records within the payer platforms, right? So in order for us to ensure that we are indeed creating records, it is needed that some of the must support parameters which are included within the IG is included within the payload by the EMR technology platforms, and some of which are negotiable as well. So that dialogue and that validation becomes very relevant when it comes to testing. And another challenge that we've seen is, or not challenge, but rather a shift that we've seen in recently is around the IG versions, right? So we've seen advancements in terms of the versions which are supported by DaVinci right now for CRD, DTR, and PASS. And there's been partners or testing partners or testing participants whom we've worked with who are in varied stages in terms of the adoption. Some of them may have shifted to 2.0 for CRD. Some of them may still be evaluating what does it mean to actually move to a newer version for PASS. And with newer versions coming out, what does it mean from an intermediate standpoint? So those are things which I believe we'll have to collectively think through and decide on approach.
Great. Tom, you were nodding in agreement or resonance to some of those comments. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think the business rules that Tim spoke about are for sure real, right? So you get a prior auth for a total hip, it's going to be slightly different from some other medical procedure. And some of the stuff that Vineet said as well, right? Like the IG may say this is required, but the business rules may dictate additional fields that are optional be required for a specific procedure that needs to be prior auth. I think as far as the testing side of it, we're working through testing with individual partners first. So for payer to payer, we have a payer partner that we're starting. For the prior auth stuff, we're selecting specific EMR partners. And as we get that functionality up to scale, we would certainly jump into FHIRplace where, all the different types of partners are there, payers and providers. The test data is a huge component of that, right? If you're testing with individual partners, you got to make sure you both have patient John Smith, and you got to do that every time with every partner. And if you go to FHIRplace, John Smith's there for everybody. So the testing at scale, I think, is really where the FHIRplace comes in, we definitely see the need, and it's on our roadmap, and it's just sort of a maturity of the functionality, where we are when we're ready to actually do that, scale up and do all that testing.
One of the things that comes up in this discussion, or comes up when we talk about prior authorization as a critical example, is there's an awful lot of workflow. There's an awful lot of activities that go from a physician or a provider or a business office seeing that a requested service does or does not require prior auth. What are the steps that happen after that? And if it does require prior auth, then we have the presentation of through DTR of documents, templates, rules, policies, usually in the form of a kind of an adaptive form, a Smart on FHIR app, something possibly native to the electronic health record, but behind which sits a combination of data that's been fetched from the electronic health record, if it's available, as well as data that the provider is expected to add or the business office is expected to add in order for the prior auth to be completed. Again, a lot of people doing steps and activities that are outside the technical umbrella, if you will. And then we have the final PAS or PAS for the actual transaction. Let me first start with you, Tim, and then I'm going to go to you, Cody. But can you talk a little bit about, there's a lot of human activity between these kind of testing events, these sentinel events that you want to make sure work in testing. But there's an awful lot of, you called it lore and legend, which is going to be my new technical term for the week or the month. I like it a lot. But can you talk a little bit about, how reality, and how the reality of the workflow impacts the testing process and vice versa? And then I'll go to you, Cody, after Tim.
Well, I'm not going to presume I have all the answers here.
Go ahead. We'll believe you anyway.
In fact, I'll say this. I know, when you sit in a seat and say, I'm kind of an expert here in the testing world. What I've really sort of learned over time is that there's an awful lot of discovery to be made. We have went into, even at Drummond, we have went into FHIRplace with several iterations of presumptions on how we test fire at scale. And we've had to take a step back a couple of times and say, well, this is where the market is at right now. Or the way that we did it in the B2B world just really doesn't apply to the health data fire world. And we have to think about it in a different way. And so kind of jumping off of that, I would say we have a lot to learn. And the only way that we're going to learn, what the impacts of some of this is to really to start to test and begin to learn from that, and then be able to pivot and have an adaptable approach where we can, tweak the testing or zero in maybe more, more closely on areas that begin to show up as areas that have a lot of interoperability issues, and sort of leave behind maybe the areas that look really good. And I think when I sit in on a lot of the work group work around the IG and the folks that are implementing it, I think a lot of folks have some gut feelings about where things are going to be, and they have presumptions about where the issues are going to be, and that may end up being true, but we have very little data that really supports that. And so I think we just have to kind of start to do the testing and find out where the scalability gremlins lie, and learn from that as an industry. And I think if we get enough consensus around a testing community like this, the testing community itself, as it learns from and discovers the issues, they can decide for themselves how we solve these interoperability issues before someone else who's not doing the business, in the trenches, makes that decision for them, right? So I think if you're a provider, if you're a payer, if you're a technology developer, being able to be at the forefront of doing the testing, find the issues, and having a voice in how to solve them as early in the process as you can, I think is I don't want to understate the value of that. And I don't want to try to tell providers and payers what their business is, but to me, a little bit on an outsider, I would want to understand the issues and then be able to, have a voice in how we solve them before someone else tells me how to do it. I guess, if I could be frank.
Be frank. That's very helpful. Thank you. Cody, your perspectives.
Yeah, I agree with everything Tim's saying. And I mean, maybe for context, I do think that the need for automated prior auth flows is becoming extremely apparent. And it is like bogging down teams And especially with many of our digital health customers who are perhaps a little bit more eager or early adopters of different solutions, or they're willing to be more creative. When we talk about electronic prior auth, this conversation is not happening in a vacuum, and we have the backdrop of AI and LLMs and many of these like voice technologies. So where yes, there was a period of a big back office of folks getting on the phone, making the phone calls, and doing the very manual approach. We see other people who are now getting very creative with automated solutions of using AI to automate those phone calls. And I think one of the things that we're tracking very closely is are people making more progress with this more of a, I'll call it a fuzzy matching process of phone calls and AI versus, a nice, tight and well-defined, well-scoped, good data hygiene API call. And I think that completely echoing Tim, getting involved early so that we can have proper API calls and proper API testing. Because I don't think anybody really wants to, recreate the fax situation all over again with electronic prior auth. But it involves that testing. And I think when we've done our kind of testing with other partners, there is still quite a bit of variance. I mean, to be fair, it's still early days. Some groups, they're willing to go far, and they've made a ton of progress in doing the full life cycle. And then there's other groups that are still getting hung up on some of the earlier steps with just negotiating how some of those authentication steps are supposed to work. And it's hard to make progress there where you haven't even got to the point of exchanging data, because in some cases the spec can be quite complicated, or it's new set of technical capabilities that maybe certain vendors have not used, or they don't have built in already. So there's a lot of variance there. And maybe, yes, that's just one more argument for getting more people involved as early as possible to start sanding down those rough edges.
Thank you. Vineeth and Tom, I'm going to ask you the next couple of questions, but certainly Tim and Cody, feel free to interject. One of the challenges that we talk about when we talk about prior authorization testing, or CMS 57F testing, which obviously includes more than just prior auth. As you pointed out, Tim, it includes the payer-to-payer, there's the provider access API, there's the patient access API. But, one of the big challenges that both of your organizations confront is, how do you align timelines across the providers in your community, Tim, in your case, Vineeth, the providers and payers? How do you align timelines? How do you align work that you're going to be doing with EHR vendors and with the health plans systems of record? What are some of the lessons that you can share with us around sort of getting the ducks in a row across trading partners? And Tom, I'll start with you.
Yeah, as I mentioned, we sort of have we have different groups handling some of those different sort of tranches of work, right? Payer to payer versus provider access. Provider access and burden reduction sort of align closely. And so we're at the point now where we are kind of doing the bring your own partner kind of testing, and we're aligning with specific partners, different EMR vendors, as I mentioned, on the provider side, and specific payers on the payer side. So those groups are they're kind of working their own roadmaps right now, because those are sort of distinct parts of 0057F. And as that functionality matures and those deployments sort of align, then I think we can sort of work off a single roadmap. And again, I do feel like there's value in something like FHIRplace, where again, as the deployments align and the APIs are now sort of part of a product stack that's going to be refreshed, having a place where we can go find all the partners that are ready to test, instead of the few that we found one by one, and again, having that test data, I think.
Vineeth, as a clearinghouse, you have Scale as your middle name, and how do you get all the ducks in a row if you're going? it's hard to scale when everybody's in a different place. And
Yeah, I
how do
know.
you get these lined up?
With the mandate date nearing, we have seen a lot of interest from the payers, and as we onboard some of them into our platform, what we've tried doing is bringing on some pilots, so that they are able to kind of test and vet and validate the flows, gain some learning out of it, essentially, get the CRD process at least to a success rate of more than 95%. Data quality, readiness, all of that is the prime factor here, right? But beyond technology, I think what we also have invested in is ensuring that we have operational readiness in terms of supporting both the providers and the payers from an intermediary standpoint. And what I mean by that is, when the transactions start really flowing in through the pipe, we would need to ensure that we have enough staff on the ground supporting any queries or questions which come from the provider side, and at the same time ensuring that we are able to kind of have the hooks connected up properly to the payer systems, ensure that the connections are going in fine. We are able to scale from an infrastructure and technology standpoint to take that volume in when all of the transactions hit our single entry point, right? In order to support that, there are various other, framework considerations as well. And what I mean by that is, ensuring that we build out some kind of a dashboard in terms of monitoring the transactions, looking at the success rates, how many of the transactions have resulted in a proper result to be shared back to the provider, ensuring that the failure rates are tracked properly so that there are actions derived out of some of the insights that we grab out of it. So all of this kind of feed into that scalability aspect from an onboarding standpoint, and that's probably one of the major considerations when it comes to the provider side. So from an intermediary standpoint, as we contract with payers in the right-hand side, we also have to look at all of the contracted providers whom we would have to onboard on scale, right? So that they are able to readily transact with the payers. How do we ensure that we have some dynamic registration capabilities, and we are evaluating UDAP as well from a technology standpoint to ensure that some of these is self-service, so that it's more seamless from an integration standpoint. But yeah, many considerations from an intermediary standpoint to keep it short.
Tim, you're nodding your head. What are your thoughts on this subject?
Well, I was just kind of thinking about putting my FHIRplace salesman hat on to intermediaries. When they're thinking, Beneath is talking about all of these operational scalability concerns he has, is even a testing environment like this, we talk about it from a technical standpoint and testing the business rules, but I would even say that there's an argument to be made that you can benefit operationally from adding capabilities that just improves your business and handling your own customers, and having a place where you can go and test those and roll those ideas out in a testing way as well. And so I don't really talk about that too much, but if Beneath is coming here as an intermediary, and he has access to test participants who are not his customers necessarily, but then is onboarding them as part of the testing environment, that's opportunity for him to to exercise his own operational procedures and processes too. So I don't know, that just kind of occurred to me as I was listening to Beneath kind of talk about his own struggles operationally with scalability.
Cody,
Yeah,
what about
100%.
you? Okay.
Yeah, I think that the thing that resonated the most from what Vineeth was saying was when you start citing statistics about, oh, a 95% pass rate, and we're like that we transition from when we think about driving change, there's carrots and sticks, and we have the boogeyman of the 2027 deadline, and that's a pretty big stick. But when we can start to actually point to case studies of people who have successfully deployed, they're using this, and it's now a positive experience in their workflow, that's a pretty big carrot. And I think that getting those initial case studies and some of those great headline stats, that's going to be the part that changes this conversation from, oh no, this thing I'm dreading, to this thing that people are excited about using.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you all. Vineeth, go ahead. Did you want to add to that?
Oh no, I was just confirming with what Tim was mentioning earlier. And I mean, as an organization, we've also invested in sandbox infrastructure just to be sure that, we are able to onboard providers and have them going to ensure that they are testing against a synthetic data set, if you will, which more so resonates on how payers might actually set up some of the data set, helping us gain some real-time feedback as well around the data setup, data readiness, so on and so forth. But yes, in terms of the FHIRplace connections, which we've been involved in some conversations with Tim around, onboarding, testing the data set against the construct that he spoke about is all valuable.
Very good. Thank you. One of the wild cards in this whole process is, the dependency that health plans and intermediaries have on the electronic health record having the capability. Some are ready, some will be ready. Providers have their own testing cycles to validate upgrades to the EHRs that they're doing. And that squeezes out time and resources. And testing, not unlike QA, gets kind of wedged further and further into the back end of the process. What are some ways that that you think of? And I'm going to start, Cody, with you, and then I'm going to go to Tim. But what are ways in which you would recommend that providers who know that they have to wait until the EHR is ready, that the EHR is going to go through its own internal test, that they could start thinking about, I've got to be ready for interoperability. I mean, I can't wait until November to say, okay, I've completed my testing process and I'm ready to get connected. They're going to have to do a lot of homework and a lot of preparation in advance. What are some lessons of advice or insights that you would share with provider organizations who are looking at these kinds of obstacles or these hurdles that they have to clear before they can get to kind of a clean, ready to test place in their stack?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll echo what Tim said earlier with regards to, getting involved as early as possible. And I know that that's not always possible, but, anything you can do to try to encourage your organization to get involved and start exchanging data or getting involved with the testing process as early as possible. I think that's always going to be good. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but data hygiene is a big element of this, and making sure your data is structured properly and you're FHIR ready, so that you can do that to the extent that individual providers or provider organizations have influence over that process. I know it's an easy one that kind of slips down on the priority list when it comes to making sure that everything's coded properly. A lot of organizations have systems where too many details live in the unstructured provider nodes, the SOAP nodes, and getting that into the appropriate structured fields and thinking about what workflow changes might be required if there's an extra step or maybe an extra team who's going to participate in some of that structured data exercise. But that's probably the one that's going to catch people by surprise, because there is a fair amount of data that does need to go across the wire here.
Tim?
Yeah, I mentioned earlier, that even Drummond, we sort of had some presumptions kind of, going into building out FHIRplace that we've had to kind of step back and rethink. And one of them was, when we've done interoperability testing in other domains, those had been mature vendor product domains. In other words, the products were already deployed and doing real work in the real world at scale, and And so the way that we approach doing interoperability test events in that, you know, in sort of in that sort of market regime, we discovered really didn't make sense when we tried to, you know, bring some of our methodology over into the FHIR world, because the implementations themselves are still, many of them are still under development, and you can't expect the market to be all at a certain point and ready to test certain functionality. So one of the things that we had to kind of step back and go is, we need to be able to test where the market is at right now. And the reality of that is, some are just getting started and some are not. Some are a little farther along the way. And in order, and the timelines are close, and we recognize that you can't really afford to do all of this complex implementation of this technology and then in a matter of, you know, weeks or months be able to go from finishing your development and go right into deployment into the real world and really expect it to work at scale. So we wanted to build FHIRplace so that folks can drop in as early in their development cycle as they can. And if you can do your implementation, your development, and this applies whether you're building a product yourself or whether you're are buying one and integrating it into your, you know, into your larger, you know, back end. So it works rather for a buy versus build. But the sooner you can start testing and develop or integrate and test along the way, so that you know that you are working as you are building or integrating, that will just have big payoff for you at the end, when you have to, you know, eventually flip the switch on and start doing it for real. And that's what we've done with FHIRplace, is to accommodate the market where it is and all of its different sort of you know, states of maturity.
Well, with that in mind, I'm going to ask one question to all the panelists. We have 9 months plus a few days before this is supposed to be done, and we can't do everything. Some people will not be ready. Some people will be more ready than others. And people are saying to you, in your respective capacities, with your respective expertise, they're saying, all right, I've got 9 months. What must I do, and what can wait? Not that I want to wait, but I know I have, you know, a defined time limit, and I've got 9 months. So what would be the most efficient way for me to get the most done when it comes to testing over the next 9 months? And Beneath, I'm going to start with you, and then I'll ask this question of the other panelists after you. You got 9 months. What do you tell your customers?
I'd start with saying, be ready for surprises for sure. But yes, start testing, right? I mean, at some point in time, we will have to get to a stage where we put your solution out there, test its readiness, determine what maturity level is that solution at, what use cases is it able to handle. Start small, even if it's only like, you know, 20 or 30% of the test cases that are use cases that can be validated at this point in time. Please do not wait. You know, get it out there, get it in front of the you know, the partners, the testing partners, technology vendors, validate them, move forward, and iterate, right? Learn, continue testing, continue validating the solution, and increase your maturity levels. But yeah, I don't know what else to say at this point in time.
No, it's a lot. You said a lot. Tom, what about you? You got 9 months. What do you see as the straightest, narrowest path to get to a reasonable conclusion by the end of December?
Yeah, so again, for us, the compliance somebody said it's a big stick. It's a huge stick for us, right? Like we don't feel like we can do part of it. So we're trying to do all of it. We have had FHIR APIs before, so we're not new to that part of it. We've also had automation with prior auths on our PBM side of the business, so the automation part isn't new. And we see the value in it, right? That we don't want to have clinicians going through reams of paper of medical policies and comparing it to a case and doing it the manual way. So, we got all hands on deck as far as the compliance requirements. But we also, again, like we see the business value. So even if we have populations of plans that aren't required to do the automation, we're going to do it anyway. And we're going to leverage the FHIR as the standard way to do this automation. So I don't have a great answer for folks who maybe haven't started or a little behind. Maybe smaller plans have less of the requirements that they have to deal with, but we're sort of going all in and feeling that we have to meet the entire requirement for sure.
Great. Cody, what about you?
Yeah, just building on what Vineeth and Tom said, I think one of the things that was perhaps surprising to me at HIMSS earlier this month was the emerging cottage industry of additional vendors who can provide support services, whether it's just a technical expertise or adapter style products. And so I think we're probably still to the phase where people are evaluating this as a buy versus build decision. And I think that there's probably a really interesting array of options in there. And if you're looking at this from the perspective of like, oh, that's just a feature that we can bolt on fast, might be a good time to reevaluate that decision and do an assessment of technology partners that could maybe accelerate the process or skip a few hops ahead.
And Tim, as our sponsor and as the testing guru in this august group of people, you've got 9 months. What are you telling your clients what constitutes success? They can't do everything. What's enough and how do they get there?
Yeah, I was sitting here thinking through that answer, and I remember this was back maybe last September at HL7 work group meetings. We're talking about the burden reduction, IGs, and room full of implementers there. The question was posed, there's a lot here in these 3 implementation guides. What do I minimally need to do for this to work in the real world? And no one could answer that question. And I remember walking away from that going, wow, we need to find that out because the time is short. And I think everyone wants to implement it all. I think, the folks that, honestly are, embracing the technology, just as Tom was just saying, they're fully embracing it. They want to do it all. But there's a reality and there's a time constraint. And some folks won't have time to do it all, but they need to know, what do I minimally need to do for this to work? Maybe for 80% of my business, or maybe for 75% of the transactions, that my, providers are going to need to find, or as a payer, I need to, to automate. I think one of the things we can do by testing is we can find that out. We can, and I mentioned this before, part of the testing is discovery. And if no one has the answers to that, if no one can sit down and write out a succinct document that says, this is the minimum you need to do to get EPA working for, a subset of your services, we need to find that out. Again, I'm just trying to be blunt and frank here, is that if no one can say that succinctly, then we need to find that out. We need to discover that, and we need to share that with the folks that are coming along. That's not much of an answer, I don't think, but that's but that's kind of keeping it real, I think.
Yeah, I think it is too. I agree. There isn't a real answer. I think there's a balance between what constitutes conformance. You know, this is a conformance period. We're not going into full production until 2027. We know that. We need to show that we can conform and comply. And what's successful conformance? Is it a successful CRD? Prior auth needed, you're done. Check. We just did it with that provider payer combination. Let's move on to the next one. We don't know. But I think there's going to be a bias and a pressure to move toward those the most efficient outcomes for the purpose of doing what we have to do in 2026. You know, this is not, no one's going to be in full production at the end of this year. They're going to be launching production at the end of this year at best. And some people are just going to be able to show, I can do it. And I'll be ready to go into production in 2027. With that, I want to thank this panel. I want to thank Timothy Bennett from Drummond. Thank you, Tim, and thank you to Drummond. I want to thank Tom Loomis from Evernorth, Vineet Atur from Trizetto, Cognizant, and Cody Eberson for joining us today. Cody from MedPlum. And with that, Michael, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much, Denny. And once again, on behalf of WEDI, thank you to all our panelists, including Lisa Palmer, who had a fantastic presentation earlier. Folks, this concludes our spotlight on testing. Just to let you know, once again, special thanks to Drummond for sponsoring this event. And the 0057 communication, as you saw in that previous slide earlier from Rob, continues. Definitely will be a factor and a very popular session topic at our spring conference, May 11th through the 14th, 100% virtual on Zoom. We'll have several 0057 related sessions featuring payers, providers, EHRs, and more. We welcome your attendance. Register at wedi.org. Real quick, the early bird discount ends on April 3rd. You can save 20 additional % if you sign up before April 3rd. On behalf of everyone at WEDI and the Drummond Group, thank you very much for participating in this WEDI Virtual Spotlight.